And in a place far, far, far away from here, there lived a young prince, much like you and me and everybody here. Now the thing is, this prince, much because he was so much like us, liked to play with his friends, and he liked to go out, and he liked to have good meals, and he was generally a very happy guy. But he got to an age when he decided it was time to be married. And so he decided to set off into the big, wide world and take a trip to search for someone that he wanted to be married to. So he packed up his backpack, packed enough food for a long journey, and told his mother and father, the king and queen, that he was setting off. And that's what he did. He went to the top of the highest mountain, and he went to the shores of the deepest ocean, and he searched, and he searched, and he searched for so long for that perfect princess. But he didn't find her. And so he came back home. And that usually happy prince was kind of pouty. He was kind of in a bad mood. It made him really crabby. He didn't want to play with his friends. No, I don't want to go out. And he didn't want to eat anything. No, I'm not hungry. I don't want to eat anything at all. And he spent a lot of time moping around the castle. Now one night, as he was pushing his peas all around his plate and just generally pouting a lot, a storm rolled in. And you could hear the thunder start to rumble across the sky. And you could hear the lightning start to crash in the sky. And then the rain started coming down in sheets. And amidst all that, there was a knock on the door. The queen looked up, and the king looked up, and the prince looked up, and they all went to the door, and they opened the door. And when they opened the door, they found there a young woman who was sopping wet from head to toe. The water was dripping off her ears, and it was dripping off the elbows of her clothes, and it was dripping off her nose and her forehead. She was really sopping, soggy, wet. And they said, well, whatever are you doing here? And she said, well, you see, not too far from here, I was riding along in my carriage, and we had a very bad accident, and the carriage, I'm afraid, is very broken. So I told my servants to take the carriage back into town and get it fixed, and I told them also to stay at an inn for the night because the weather's so horrible. But I saw your light ahead, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just walk a little bit and see if they'll have me here at this house. So that's what brings me here to you. And so the queen invited the young lady in and started to talk to her a little bit more. Well, why did you have a carriage? Where were you going? And the young girl said, well, you see, I'm a princess, and I was traveling these roads with my entourage, and we were on our way to another party. So, but our carriage broke down. And the queen's eyes grew wide and thought, oh, a princess, And the king's eyes grew wide and thought, oh, a princess, And the prince just kept pushing his food around the place because he, had been there all over the world and just doubted for a second this girl was really a princess. Because a princess would be kind, and she'd be brave, and she'd be smart. And he tried kind and brave and smart all over the world. Now, the queen decided to have a little test to see if this girl truly was a princess. So the queen called her servants to her, and she said, you know what I want you to do? I want you to stack not 1, not 5, not 10 mattresses, but 20 mattresses, one on top of the other, and put blankets on top of those, and underneath all of that, slip a little tiny hard green pea. And so that's what the servants did. Because if she was really truly a princess, she'd be able to feel that pea on her back and disrupting her sleep. Now it turns out that while the young lady was waiting for her room to get ready and drying off and having something to eat, she and the prince started talking and talking a lot. And the prince actually came to realize that this young girl in front of him was kind, because she'd sent her servants ahead and told them to stay somewhere safe for the night, and that she was brave because she didn't break down when her carriage fell apart, and that she was smart because she had come up with a plan. So he really started to like her. But then bedtime came, and the princess went into her special room, and she climbed up a ladder. Because with 20 mattresses, she had to climb up the ladder. And then she lay down in the bed, and she started to fall asleep. And the night passed. And then the next morning, it was breakfast time, and the queen and the king and the prince was there, kind of pushing his food around a little bit like he always did. And the young lady came down, and the queen said, "How did you sleep last night, my dear?" And the young lady said, "Well, I am so sorry to tell you this, Your Majesty, but the bed was really, really lovely. However, I think there's something somewhere under the mattress, because there was a really hard spot, and it was terribly uncomfortable, and I wasn't able to sleep really at all, so I'm kind of exhausted. There's something there in that bed. And I wanted to let you know that before you have other guests, because you might want to, fix that a little bit." Well, the queen knew that this young lady truly had passed the test and was a princess. And so she threw up her silverware and said, "Hooray!" And the king threw up his silverware and said, "Hooray!" And the prince threw up his silverware and he said, "Hooray!" And the prince and the princess were married, and they lived a long and happy life together. And they took that pea from way underneath all those mattresses, and they put it in a museum, so everybody in the kingdom could come and look at it and hear the story of how the prince and princess came to be married. And as far as I know, unless a mouse has taken it or somebody has eaten it, it's in that museum today still. End. All right, the next one is also a classic, and if you guys want to chime in, because you probably know it, this is called The Little Red Hen, okay? So the little red hen lived in a barnyard with all sorts of other animals, like hens do. She would cluck around the yard, and there was a mouse who liked to scamper around, and there was a duck who liked to quack, quack, quack his way through his days, and there was a big old pig who liked to eat at the trough and roll in the mud. And it so happened that this hen decided one day she'd really like to cook a little more things for her family, and so she started looking about on the ground. And not too long after she really started looking, she found some beautiful golden grains of wheat. "Perfect," she said. And she raised up her head and she looked around the barnyard at all her friends and she said, "Who will help me plant my wheat?" And the mouse said, "Squeak, squeak, not I," and scampered away. And the duck, who decided he'd rather be swimming, quack, quack, not I. And the pig, who'd always rather be eating, said, "Not I." So the little red hen picked up those grains by herself and scratched some holes in the ground and planted them carefully, and then she watched and she watered and she watered and she watched, and that grain grew tall and strong and beautiful. And soon it was time to cut down the grain. And so she looked around the barnyard at all her friends again, and she said, "Who's going to help me cut down the grain?" And the mouse, of course, was mid-scamper and said, "Not I." And the duck was mid-swim, quack, quack, "Not I." And the pig, of course, just lifted his head from the trough when he was eating enough to say, "Not I." So the hen cut the wheat herself and laid it out to dry. So once that wheat was dry, she thought, it's time to take the wheat to the mill and turn it into flour so I can cook it. And so she asked around again, and what do you think she said when she asked the mouse if he'd help her? What do you think he said? "Not I." And what do you think the duck said when she asked him for help? Quack, quack, "Not I." And what do you think the pig said? "Not I." And so she gathered up all that by herself and somehow managed to push it all in a wheelbarrow down to the miller's, where it was milled into a nice, fine flour. And then she pushed the wheelbarrow all the way back home. And as she stood at her doorstep, she thought, well, I'm going in to bake, and everybody likes to bake something. So who wants to help me bake some bread? Mouse? And Mouse once again said, "Ta-da!" And duck once again, quack, quack, not I. And pig once again, not I. Well, she just decided I'll bake it myself. So she went inside and she washed her little feet and she prepared that bread. Oh, and you know the smell of fresh baked bread, how rich it smells, and fresh and warm. You can't wait to put a little bit of butter on it. Oh, it started to smell so good, and the smell wafted over the barnyard, and all the animals, not just her friends, lifted up their heads and, ooh, Hen's making something really good. So Mouse went up to the door, and Duck went up to the door, and Pig even trundled up to the door. So that when Hen opened up her door, her three friends almost fell inside of her house. And she said, well, who's going to help me eat my bread? I will, squeaked the Mouse. Quack, quack, quack. I will, said the Duck. The Pig was so excited he could barely say I will. But the little red hen looked at all three of her friends. And she looked at the Mouse and she said, what did you say when I asked for your help to plant my wheat seeds and to cut them down and to take them to the miller and to help me bake them? And the Mouse kind of backed up a little and said, not I. And then she looked at the Duck and she said, and Duck, you, when I asked you to help me plant the seeds and cut the wheat and help me take that wheelbarrow all the way down the road to the miller's house and then come back and wash yourself and help me bake it in the bread, what did you say, Duck? And Duck said, quack, quack, not I. And then she looked at Pig and said, Pig, what did you say when I asked you to help me plant the wheat and to help me cut it down, take it to the miller's, bring it back home, bake it? What did you say? And Pig said, snorting sadly, not I. And Hen looked at all of them and she said, that's exactly right. So none of you gets to have the bread with me. And she shut the door. And instead she and her chicks enjoyed all that bread that she had made that tasted just as good as it smelled and came from all of Hen's hard work. The end. We're on a roll here, right?
Can you try and open that for me?
Okay, so our next story is Rumpelstiltskin. All right? So now, a long time ago, again far away, there was a young girl who lived with her father who thought it would be wonderful if she could get a place to live in the king's court. And so he kept thinking of ways to get her to be able to move to court and make some friends and have a successful life. And it so happened that one day he actually had an audience with the king. The king was sitting on his throne and the man came in and told him all about his wonderful daughter, and the king wasn't very convinced that she wasn't different from anybody else. And so the man made up a story. He said, you know what? My daughter can turn straw into golden thread. And the king said, now that's something new and different and interesting. Gold thread. You'll have to bring her to the palace, and she can stay with us, and we'll see what happens. Well, the father was so excited, and he told his daughter, and she packed up her things, and she went to the palace, and she was excited, but she was a little bit nervous, because the very first day she got there, one of the servants shook her hand, bowed to her, and led her down a long corridor. And she opened a door, and in that room, there was a big pile of straw, and there was a spinning wheel with a little stool. And the servant said, the king wants you to turn all this straw into gold thread like your dad said that you could do. And the girl thought, oh no, what did my father say? I can't make straw into gold thread. Oh goodness, this is going to be a problem. And she sat down on the stool and she didn't have any answers, and she started to get very upset, and she even started to cry, and she thought, oh no, because if I don't do this, I won't be able to stay here, and I'll have to go home, and oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And as she sat there worrying and worrying and worrying, the door creaked open just a little bit. And she looked to see who had come in. But it turns out down very close to the floor, there was a little man. And he was a little bit wrinkled and a little bit hunched over. And he said, "Why are you crying, young lady? Why are you so sad?" And she said, "Well, my father told the king I could turn straw into gold, and I'm worried I'll be sent away if I don't do it, and I'm just really scared, and I don't know what to do." And she started to cry again. And the little man said, "Well, I could help you. I know how to turn straw into golden thread." And the little girl said, "You do? You do?" And the man said, "Yes, but you have to give me something for all my hard work." And the girl thought, "Oh, I don't know. My necklace. I'll give you my necklace. You can have my necklace. It's very valuable and it's beautiful. You can take it." And so the little man took it and looked at it and thought, that's a pretty good deal. Put it in his pocket. He sat down on the stool and he started to spin and spin and spin. And pretty much very soon all that straw had been turned into golden thread. Whew. And when the girl looked to thank the little man, he disappeared. So now she thought her troubles were over. She went down the hall again, showed everybody the room of gold thread, thought it was all great. But the next morning when she woke up, another servant came to the door with another ring of keys and took her down another long hallway and opened another door to an even bigger room. And inside that room there was a bigger pile of straw. And the servant said, "All this you have to turn into gold thread too. The king says so, or else you can't stay here and you can't go home. You'll just be cast out into the world." And the young girl thought, "Oh no, I didn't tell anybody what I did yesterday, how it worked out, and how am I possibly going to do it again a second time?" And as she sat there worrying on the stool and starting to cry, the door opened again. And in came that wrinkled old little man, asking her why she was crying. And she said, "Well, you did such a good job yesterday, that now they want me to spin this room of straw into gold thread. I'm in so much trouble." And she kept crying and crying. And the little man said, "Well, if I did it yesterday, I certainly could do it again today. But what can you give me for it?" And she started worrying her hands, and she said, "Oh, I don't know. My ring. Oh, my ring. You can have my ring. It's a beautiful ring. Look at the stone. It's my favorite. It's the color of the sea. Take my ring." And so he put out his hand and he took the ring and he said, "I'll do it for that." Back in his pocket. And he jumped up on the stool and he spun and he spun and he spun and he spun. And that whole room of straw, by the end of the day, was gold thread. And when the little girl turned to thank him again, he disappeared. So, she wiped her head again, slumped over her wheel, walked down the hall eventually, went to bed so tired, glad it was all over. Except the next morning, another knock at the door. Another servant with another ring of keys down another long hallway into another room, this time the biggest room of all. And the straw wasn't just a big pile, it was stacked from the floor all the way up to the ceiling. And the servant looked at the girl and said, "I think you know what you have to do." And the girl said, "Oh man, am I in trouble now? This is going to be horrible." And she sat on the stool crying harder than she'd ever cried before, because she thought, no good could come of this. This is going to be impossible. And sure enough, the door opened, the little man came in. He said he'd help her, but she looked at him and said, I don't know what else I have. I gave you my necklace, I gave you my ring. I don't know what else I could possibly give you." And the little man was thinking very fast, and he said, "How about this? You give me the first child that you have, your very first baby, if I turn all this straw into gold thread." And the girl, who was so desperate and thought, that's never going to happen in my life, said, "Fine, you can have my first kid. Just turn this straw into gold, please, because I want to stay here. And I want to be able to visit my house." So the man jumped on the stool and spun and spun and spun, and pretty much that whole room then turned to gold thread. And with that, finally, the king was satisfied that he had enough gold thread, he didn't need any more. And she got to stay at the court. And she made friends, and she talked with her dad, and she eventually fell in love and got married. And then she had a baby. And everything was fine, and the whole episode with the thread was such a long, distant memory, until one day when it was almost her baby's first birthday, she heard squeak, and she looked down into the room, and there was the little wrinkled old man whom she hadn't seen in a very long time. She backed up a little, and he said, "Well, remember our deal. You told me if I helped you with that straw, turning it into gold thread that last time, you would let me have your firstborn, the first time. It's been a while, but I'm back." And with this, the lady started to cry harder than she had ever cried in her entire life. "Please, no, please, I just never thought it would happen, and you can't do this, please don't." And she cried tears until there was a puddle around her feet. And finally the little man took a little pity and said, okay, stop crying. Let's do this. You have 3 days to try to guess my name. And if you guess my name, you get to keep your baby. And if not, then he's coming home with me. Okay, said the lady.